Yeah, I had explained what the issue was, and it makes sense. It's like a very operating before the agreement's in place. It's a little awkward, even though we kind of do that with the bus and rail all the time, but not initial year. So, okay, yeah, let us know. But it's ready to go. I mean, I like double, triple, quadruple checked it yesterday. Well, it's ready to go on the 28th, so there should be a pickup. Well, yeah, it's like anytime there's a change, it's out of my, not my call, but anytime there's a change. So Teresa Voss, who was assigned to it, worked with her. She flagged it. Kind of said it in motion. I think but it got flagged. But we're all good now. In person. Yeah. No, Mike is. Sam and I are like, is this too, I don't know if that's good. He's in his role. He may have it too. So he's not a chief.
Do you prefer Mike or Michael? I should have asked you that. Okay, good. After we got that, I was like, oh shoot. Good. Okay. Yeah, I'm one of them. I hope they felt that. I'm your people. Good. Did it go okay? It's okay? Yeah. I don't know if I told you this was you know, I'm on oh, good. heard, I think, and I can remember. We are, yeah, yeah, less first, yes, yeah. There are more, there are a lot. Yeah. I know, as it should be. Long overdue. Yes. Refreshing, yes.
Here we go. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Let's convene the joint meeting of the Transit Management Committee and the Rail Management Committee today, and welcome everybody to the April meeting. We'd especially like to welcome Jessica Medford-Miller. This is your first week? First week on the job?
2.5.
Great. This is like, if you want to throw someone in the deep end, let's just do the budget. So welcome. This should be fun. Welcome. We're glad to have you on board.
It's a pleasure.
Great. Pat, will you provide the roll call for us now?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. City of Avondale, Shirlene Pinella. City of Okay. Shirlene, is that you? Okay. City of Buckeye, Dan Cotterman. City of Chandler, Ryan Peters. City of El Mirage, Autumn Grooms.
Here.
Town of Fountain Hills, Dave Trimble.
Here.
Town of Gilbert, Rob Bohr.
Here.
City of Glendale, Kevin Phelps.
Here.
City of Goodyear, Julie Cairns.
Here.
Maricopa County, Jacqueline Edwards or Cameron Dowling.
Jacqueline Edwards is here.
City of Mesa, Chris Brady.
Here.
City of Peoria, Eric Strunk.
Here.
City of Phoenix, Mario Paniagua.
Here.
Town of Queen Creek, Bruce Gardner.
Here.
City of Scottsdale, Mark Melanchenko.
Here.
City of Surprise, Mike Gent.
Here.
City of Tempe, Eric Iverson.
Here.
Chair, we're ready to go.
Thank you, Pat. If a committee member would like to ask a question or make a comment during the meeting, if you're online, please type your comment in the box and it'll be read aloud and answered. And if you're on either side of me, just wave your hand. So all meeting attendees, please mute your computer or microphone or phone. All right. The public will be provided with an opportunity at this time to address the committee on non-agenda items and all action items. Up to 3 minutes will be provided per speaker unless the chair allows more at his or her discretion. A total of 15 minutes for all speakers will be provided. Pat, do we have any for, oh, sorry. Well, yes, we do. Sorry. You get organized here. I guess it doesn't matter which one. Mr. Blue, you're on.
The first one that this meeting I have to address in one way and not the other.
Okay. You know the rules better than I do, so.
I wish that you're returning to something else.
3 minutes, Mr. Blue.
All right. On your first agenda item, the community support and services, I was noticing that it's split between the two entities. Now, back in the day when we first started doing this, there was Valley Metro and then there was Valley Metro Rail. And then the organization, hi ma'am, I'm the one that they told you about. No, it's Mr. Crowley, but Blue is, right. But I answered to both. I need that 10 seconds back. I'd like to note in there that some of the stuff it says is rail operations. But as I pointed out, it went from the board being Valley Metro to it now being Valley Metro Rail, Valley Metro, because that's the importance. And then when I look at it's supposed to be multimodal, I love that you guys and the city of Phoenix have decided with the new rail project, 5, not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 of the bus routes don't have connections to the rail. Is there a reason for this? Is it because rail is more important than multimodal, or that was the way that your predecessor governed it? Now, I've been a part of this process for 35 years. And inputting, I'm trying to make sure that the system does both what Prop 400 and those that wrote it wanted done, being that I was the bus person for Prop 400. So when I see in your next agenda that it has route changes, I found out now that in 2013, because we had the recession, none of your standards was going to be met. And that what is your planning going to be and the expansion of the service continually? It ain't happening. Why not? Because the monies that are there are supposed to be split 60-40. And I don't see that 60% making and doing the bus and expanding it and such. And also when I see what you guys are doing with the rail, it says that the indent cities are the ones that pay for operating. Well, I've found 4 things in your little recommendations here where it isn't the cities that are covering it. It's coming out of the 400 fees. Not supposed to do it that way. Just as you're not allowed to use federal funds to pay for your lobbyist. When you did do that increase, what pot of money did you take it out of? Because if you took it out of one that is a blended money source, you can't use it because you would be using federal money to give them such. See you in a little bit.
All right. Next item is Chief Executive Officer's report. First one.
Thank you, Chair Brady. Good morning, everyone. I am so happy to be here. By the way, I am Jessica Mefford-Miller. I'm our CEO at Valley Metro. I'm delighted to join the team and this committee. I'm coming to you with a lot of experience in the transit industry. Most recently, I was executive director at St. Louis's Metro Transit. I am so pleased to be part of this growing organization. I understand well the value of the relationships between Valley Metro and its member cities. I think this is a fantastic collaborative partnership, and committee structure. So I'm going to give you a few updates on things that are happening here at Valley Metro. April's a beautiful month in Phoenix. And this is Bike Month, at Valley Bike Month. And so Valley Metro is working with our member cities, clubs, employers, and community organizations to promote Valley Metro Bike Month events. You know, biking is an important part of our multimodal transportation system. And of course, it's a good first last mile connection. And those bikes can be taken aboard Valley Metro's buses and trains throughout the region. The artwork that you see on the screen was created by Valley Metro's own marketing team, which is just beautiful. The events and coordination is being sponsored by our trip reduction program staff. You can find more about Valley Bike Month at sharetheride.com. Last month, Valley Metro was recognized by Arizona Forward. Actually, Valley Metro, for the second time in our history, received the Arizona Forward's 50th year anniversary award for the Central Region. This award, which Valley Metro did not apply for, we were nominated for, recognizes Valley Metro's contributions to the environment here in Arizona and within the Central Phoenix region. We sincerely appreciate that longstanding partnership between Valley Metro and Arizona Forward. And finally, on screen, you can see upcoming meetings for the balance of the month of April and May. It's a busy season, as you note, with budget preparation process. So I look forward to our discussion today and the ensuing meetings this and next month. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Appreciate that. Look forward to working with you.
Likewise.
All right, we are now ready for the consent agendas presented for action. Has everybody had a chance to review that? If there's any committee members or any questions or items that need to be pulled for separate discussion? If not,
Chair.
Yes.
This is Mario from Phoenix. I do have a couple questions on item 3B, if we can pull that one.
Okay. Very good. Well, since any questions on the minutes? No? Okay, well, let's just do them separately. We'll approve the minutes first and then let Mario ask us questions on 3B. Does that work for you, Mario?
Sure.
Okay, let's just do that. So, well, I don't know. That means we have to do that whole roll call thing. Never mind.
It's your call, sir.
Yeah, I know. So I'm going to change it.
Okay.
I'm going to pivot. Okay, Mario, what's your question?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
3B, right? 3B.
So, and just looking at the contract extension that's requested, really more the 3.5 million for the 6 months beginning in July. My understanding is that 3.5 million really reflects the current level of service that's being provided by this contractor. And so the idea is that this would provide a period of transition from the current contractor to the new contractor for these services. So I would expect that there would be a kind of a phase down of the dollar amounts that we're seeing for the current contractor as new contracts kick in and start to be utilized. And so I just have a question about that and how we got to putting in the full $3.5 million for 6 months, because that essentially reflects the contractor doing the same level of work that they've been doing in the current contract without the new contracts being in place. If my question doesn't make sense, let me know and I'll try to restate it more clearly.
All right, I see a lot of people with their heads down and
Yeah.
I don't know who's going what.
The question is for me, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. This is Henry Kutukwa, and I will touch on the topic and then ask Robert Forrest, our Deputy Director of Capital Planning, to chime in. The $3.5 million is, yes, for the scope of work for the rest of the calendar year, beginning from July 1st. We're actually asking for 1.5 million to finish up the rest of this fiscal year and 3.5 to finish up the calendar year. In between that period, we envisage a transition from the current PCRSS contract onto the next planning support services contract. We don't expect that to take a lot of time. We believe that even if we change the team, it will be a very short transition. We're not looking for that to be an extensive transition. So we don't expect that to burn into our budget. I believe that is where your question really is. What do we expect that transition to be? And how does that impact the $3.5 million, if I can paraphrase your question?
Yeah, thank you, Henry. So there's language in your report that says that you don't expect that there would be any overlap or duplication of efforts within that transition. But at the same time, you'll have this full amount, this 3.5 million, as well as the new contracts in place. So I just want to get a better understanding of how that's gonna work.
Well, the 3.5 really is for the scope that we have for the rest of the calendar year. If we use the same team, and I'm not saying that we're going to, then there will be no transition. Then that $3.5 million will take us the rest of the calendar year. If we use a different team, then we expect a transition, a very short transition, for the old team to hand over to the new team. And that is where the difference, what does that mean with regard to that $3.5 million? We don't know yet, but we expect it to be a very short period where the old team hands over to the new team.
Can I ask, now you've got me interested. So why are you asking for the funding now? Why don't you wait until you see what because if it ends up being with the same contractor, right, then the 3.5 is already built into your assumption of the cost of work of the services. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So I guess it seems like you're bringing something to us that you're not sure whether you're going to need or not, or what's driving the action for today?
It's timing. Our old contract will end June 30th. The new contract begins July 1st. We don't have time for that transition to take place. So we can't just come June 30th and hand over to a new team July 1st. So beginning July 1st, remember this is not the total we will spend. This is up to. It doesn't mean that we will spend the 3.5 million. It's up to. So, and that up to is the maximum amount we intend to spend for the rest of the calendar year. In case we continue with the new team, with the old team till the rest of the calendar year, that is up to how much we will spend. We will still spend the money doing the work. It's the transition from one team to the other that actually we're asking for. So this is up to, not the actual amount we will spend.
Mario?
So I do get that we're just talking about contract authority here, and we're not talking about what you're saying you're going to actually spend. I get I get that issue, but I think it would maybe be better if we had a more clear understanding of how that transition was going to take place, so that we didn't have the full amount of contract authority for the next 6 months in this contract, as well as having the other contracts in place. I know that there would be some transition, and I get that. We would have to expect that. But is there a way that maybe we can come back at a future meeting with this one with a more clear delineation? I know that process is underway now for selection of the new contractors. Is that possible?
We run the risk of, because the board is going to get busy with the budget for the rest of the year. So we run the risk of this getting tied up in that, and we're getting to the end of the fiscal year and not having a process in place to transition from one team to the other. And that's what we are afraid of.
So Henry, today, what is the amount that you need to get through the remaining term of the existing contract you have today?
We've already gone through the current fiscal year. That's why we're asking for $1.5 million to take us through June 30th.
Okay, so the 1.5 covers from some point all the way to the end of the fiscal year.
Or fiscal year, exactly.
Okay, and then is the contract,
The contract
will it
ends
change in the end of June 30th?
June
fiscal
30th. The
year?
contract ends.
So then you would be, so how soon will you be making the decision about, I mean, here we are in April. You will have, when will you make a final decision on the contract for the following year?
By June board meeting, we will be coming to the board to authorize the new contract.
So it can't be, I think maybe that's the dilemma, is that it seems like that you're creating this kind of deadline of crisis by waiting and by having that in June and then also making sure you have the funding available begin July 1.
Well, I say we're actually coming to the board in May.
Correct. So
Yeah.
the selection for the new on-call contracts is already done.
Mhm.
We've made those selections. We're working with those firms to get their contracts executed. So again, it's kind of hard to say how long it might take to get all those contracts underway. Our goal is to try to get this transition done as quickly as we can, right? We don't want to draw it out all the way to the end, but we try to build ourselves some leeway in there in case something does happen and we have to draw it out a little bit longer than just a month or two. And as Mario had pointed out, the dollars have already been budgeted. We're just asking for the contract award authority to be in.
So yeah, so Mario, if the idea, we're not necessarily asking for additional funding, it's just you're asking for authorization so that you can start spending the money as soon as you have the contract, the agreement executed.
That is correct.
That's correct.
Does that help, Mario?
It does. I think for me to feel comfortable, I think then if there's a way to report back to us on exactly how this is going to play out with as we get closer to the new contracts going into effect, I think I would just feel comfortable if we had some more information about how the contracts are going to be used. Right now, you're saying you don't know. You might need the $3.5 million. That's why you're asking for it, because it's just the up to contract authority. But it would be good if you could provide the additional information as you learn the information. Just give it to us.
Do you have that idea in May when you bring that item to the board on the selection, or when will you have that information?
We can definitely have it by May, yes.
Yeah, we'll have it in May.
So next month, Mario, we'll approve this item and then we'll report back to you on the numbers. Because again, it's it's just an authorization. It's not a.
Right. Yeah. We can work with that.
Are you guys good with that?
Yeah.
All right. Now, I have no idea what we just agreed to, but someone might make a motion.
I'll go ahead and move approval of the recommendation, along with the caveat that we get the additional information next month.
I'll
Okay, so
second
that's-
it.
Thank you. Okay, we have did you get that second, Pat? Did you see who that was?
I believe it was Dave Trimble.
Was that, there you are, Dave. Thanks.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you.
Sorry. I feel further away now than I used to. Okay. So we have a motion and a second for the consent agenda with the idea that in May, when the item comes forward on this contract, we'll provide some more details on the funding and how that matches up with the services. Okay. So we have a motion, a second. So we'll have a roll call vote. Pat, please.
City of Avondale, Shirlene Pinella. City of Buckeye, Dan Cotterman. City of Chandler, Ryan Peters.
Yes.
City of El Mirage, Autumn Grooms.
Yes.
Town of Fountain Hills, Dave Trimble.
Aye.
Town of Gilbert, Rob Bohr.
Yes.
City of Glendale, Kevin Phelps.
Aye.
City of Goodyear, Julie Cairns.
Aye.
Maricopa County, Jacqueline Edwards.
Yes.
City of Mesa, Chris Brady.
Aye.
City of Peoria, Eric Strunk.
Yes.
City of Phoenix, Mario Paniagua.
Yes.
Town of Queen Creek, Bruce Gardner.
Yes.
City of Scottsdale, Mark Melanchenko.
Yes.
City of Surprise, Mike Gent.
Yes.
City of Tempe, Eric Iverson.
Yes.
Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you, Pat. All right, we'll now continue to our regular agenda. So make sure I stay on script here. So this is item number 4. We're going to ask Jessica to introduce the FY 2023 operating and capital budget for Valley Metro RPTA and Valley Metro Rail.
Good morning again. I'm going to ask Jim Hilliard to introduce the draft FY 22 capital budget. Operating budget.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Jessica. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members. So we're going to share with you today the deck that we used with your board members in the study session a couple days ago. We thought it was important to kind of provide you with the same context that they received. There's really sort of 3 takeaways from the presentation you'll receive. The first is a bit of background that we think is important for board members that don't spend every day dealing with our budget, just so they understand how the pieces fit together. Secondly, we've made some fairly significant changes to the way that we're presenting our budget request to the board. And so we wanted to be able to talk through why we made those changes and then how to get the most out of the format of the new material. And then thirdly, we wanted to provide sort of a high level overview of what's changing and why, so that you can see how the overall pieces fit together. And then in subsequent meetings, we're diving into the individual issues with both your staff and the board members. So those are the 3 things we'll be focused on. With the board, we moved at a rather modest pace. We know this is a group that's accustomed to dealing with budgets, and so we plan on moving much more quickly to try to make the best use of your time. That said, if you'd like to hear more about a particular issue or we're not making sense, please don't hesitate to stop us. Answering your questions is the most important thing we'll do today. So with that, I will hand it off to our budget manager, Tyler Olson, who will cover the background section of the budget, and then I'll pick back up once we get into the new format and the FY23 request.
Thank you, Jim. Chair Brady, members of the Joint Committee, appreciate the time today. So a little background on our budget process. Our budget process is really built with your member city's process in mind. We start early in the year, roughly 10 months ahead of time, developing preliminary assumptions. We deliver a preliminary transit service budget, so the services that your city funds through the IGA process in October is not to exceed amount. We continue refining those estimates as we move through the year, gathering more data. Come back in March, April timeframe to present for information, and then back later in the year for adoption. Not only do we present through the regular committee process, but we do have budget-focused committees. We have a monthly financial working group, which is made up of your Transit City staff, digging into those details of the budget, as well as the audit finance subcommittee. And at the board of director level, we typically have at least 1 or 2 study sessions for the year, assisting them in understanding our budget and process. A little background on revenues. As you all know, we have 4 primary sources of revenue: Prop 400, federal, fares, and member cities. Touching on Prop 400, this is 20-year sales tax, half-cent sales tax expiring December of 25. Based on state statute on the bus side, it can be used on both operations and capital. On the rail side, strictly used for capital or those pre-capital activities that are related to light rail construction. And allocations by agency are determined by the board. So taking a look at Ptf trends to date, actual through February. First column, 21 actuals, and then 22 budget, 22 actuals. What's important here is that budget variance to date for 22, positive, 21% favorable, over $25 million. Looking at prior year actuals, we're at $24 million. So good news there. So how does that relate to the life of the tax? So this table essentially shows total revenue allocations, so actual collections that we received by agency and what's been forecasted by agency. So a little over $3 billion. $2.8 billion have been allocated or programmed in that 20 years. And so that leaves us with about a quarter of $1 billion of unprogrammed PTF available based on that.
Tyler, let me jump in very quickly on that point. So naturally, the question is, with $250 million available in unprogrammed PTF, what are we going to do with that money? So the challenge there is that most of those additional revenues are one-time savings associated with COVID. You had federal relief funds that came in. We also had very conservative budgets in 21 and 22, combined with gangbusters revenues. And so now we have this good problem to have of a very significant unprogrammed balance. Clearly, the challenge of using that for services, which is where I think we would all want to put them, is if we use one-time revenues for ongoing services, we create a structural shortfall that once those funds are exhausted, cities then either have to come in with additional funding to continue them, or we have to scale back services, and probably on the heels of convincing folks to vote for Prop 400 so we don't have to cut services, cutting services wouldn't be a great look. So this budget doesn't make presumptions about how these monies will be used. I think it's our assumption that the agency will work with Jessica and the board to identify options to put these to good use between now and the end of Prop 400. But we did want to highlight the fact that they're available, they're significant, and we think there's opportunities to put them to good use through the end of Prop 400.
Okay, and every time you say that, you are doing really well. But now now I know what it feels like from the council side to hear the manager saying, these are one-time monies, they're not going to be recurring, they're not ongoing. So just keep every time
over and over.
These are one-time. You were doing so well at the beginning, and then at the end you kind of let it go. One-time, non-recurring. Okay, awesome, perfect.
Thank you, sir. Will do.
Okay, taking a look at local revenue trends in comparison to PTF. PTF's at the right. You can see that although some cities are doing a little bit better than others, I think what's important here is growth over last year is positive in all cases.
And Tyler, let me jump back in for 1 second. So this budget, probably more than any I've seen since the Great Recession, is one where we really have to keep in mind sort of both sides of the ledger, or we're going to sort of misunderstand the overall message that it's sending. And what I mean by that is this. Were you to look at this slide in isolation, a natural reaction would be, gadzooks, that's 2 to 3 times our normal year-over-year revenue growth. We are in the money. Happy days are here again. I got to get me one of them money guns, right? In a minute, I'm going to go through the expenditure side of the budget. And when you see that in isolation, you're going to be horrified because the inflationary numbers there are very, very big. And a natural reaction would be, oh my gosh, we're broke. We can't possibly afford this. Life is over. Now, the fact of the matter is, because those two things are happening at the same time, neither one is true, right? And it kind of makes sense. The very same increases in prices that are driving costs on the expenditure side of our budget are also driving up sales tax revenues because they're based upon those costs. And the wage increases are allowing people to continue buying at those higher prices. And so this budget remains in balance because both sides are going up at once. And so that's a really important kind of takeaway. Most years you can sort of look at the incremental changes on one side, incremental changes on another side, and deal with them in isolation. If you do that in this budget, you'll come away thinking that we either have a windfall or a shortfall, when in fact neither's really true because they're moving in tandem.
Can I ask a quick question? You brought that up.
Please.
So when I look at sales tax collections, we separate like the retail transit, but then construction sales tax, that's a whole separate item. Do you receive construction sales tax also or no?
I don't believe we do.
I don't think so, because you're not getting that.
Yep.
That wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, we're strictly.
Because we parse out even our own sales tax and say some of that could be more one-time than recurring also.
Yep.
But I don't think that would apply to you. That doesn't make sense.
No, it does not. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, please, Tyler.
Okay, taking a look at bus fare revenues for FY22. Positive trends here. As you all know, we moved back to front door boardings in October, so you can see a spike there continuing. And forecasting that out, we predict that we'll be over $3 million in bus fare revenue by the end of the year. So very positive things, and with the higher gas prices, that could potentially increase as well, more than this. Taking a look, same look at light rail, same trend, doing even better, looking like we're about $5 million through the end of fiscal year 22. So all positive signs there. Moving on to the expenses. Really two main categories in our operating budget. Transit services, these are the services that we operate based on services that you request in your city's level of service, revenue miles. And then support services, these are all the indirect costs for operating budget. So transit services, on the RPTA side of things, RPTA produces bus service, demand service, van pool service, and Valley Metro Rail, of course, light rail and streetcar focused. So what are support services? Well, it's really what the indirect costs are of what we do, whether that's focused on transit service, agency business operations, or other services on behalf of your cities. So our regional customer call center, ADA mobility center, providing service to the entire region, as well as marketing and community outreach. And our planning department, of course, working with your city staff for different service modeling plans, Title VI, important FTA surveys, origin destination, commute solutions, promoting alternative modes of transportation, and then administration of finance, all the internal support services, from IT to legal to finance and payroll. Moving on to the 23 operating budget. So really, how do those categories get funded within the RPTA budget? Transit services at the left, you can see that that's primarily funded with public transportation funds and member city funds. Combination 91% of that funding makes up transit services. On the right, you can see that support services are primarily made up of public transportation funds, regional area road funds. It's 93% of that budget. And I want to point out that there's no member city funds in the RPTA side of things. We have PTF, very flexible, as well as regional area road funds. So taking a look at RPTA sources and uses, I want to point out that the 23 includes the inflationary items, obligations, and recommendations that Jim will talk about shortly. So one noticeable thing I want to touch on first is the decrease in the federal COVID relief money, down 21.7 million. That is due to the direction from your cities to draw down those COVID relief monies as fast as we can. So there's none remaining on RPTA's books for 23. You'll see a $500,000 number in there. That's really just a pass-through from City of Phoenix for the service that they operate that we fund with public transportation on your behalf. So opposite of that, you can see that transit service agreements are going up, right? What COVID relief can't pay for operations is funded by the cities, as well as public transportation funds. You can see that number's going up as well. So total program for 23 is 193.4 million. Moving on to the VMR side of things, for those categories, transit service operations primarily funded with member city and federal in this case for 23. VMR still has 33 million in COVID relief money remaining. That's primarily due to the timing of the eligible expenses that can be drawn down for those services and contracts with federal clauses in them. So it's important to note that on a normal year without the relief funding, federal funds would be about 5% in transit services, member city making up the difference. On the support service side of things, you can see that's primarily member city funded combined with federal funds and PTF. I do want to note that PTF funds in support services are really for future project development. So those activities related to systems planning, design, and pre-engineering activities for light rail expansion. So that is defined as capital in nature by the FTA. Moving on to Valley Metro sources and uses. Big increase here is COVID relief money. You can see the $33 million still programmed there. So that's an increase of 78% over last year. Member city contributions relatively flat at 2%, even though costs are going up by 24% based on the inflationary items that we're about to talk about. With that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, Tyler. So with that context, let me spend just a minute explaining how why we made changes to the way we're presenting our recommendations for this year and how to get the most out of that format. So as you probably recall, in the past, the budget that we would present was what I would call an accounting layout, in that it had sort of a table for each division in Valley Metro, and then your typical accounting line items of salaries and benefits and consulting and equipment and whatnot. That's a great format for documenting where our money is at and what's approved. But if you're a board member trying to understand like what's changing and why, and should I support that or not, It's not super transparent because any given issue might exist in both more than one division and therefore on more than one table, and also in more than one line item because it could have salaries and benefits and equipment and other things associated with it. And so what we tried to do this year was to put together a format that was issue-based, not accounting-based, identified each issue very clearly to provide complete transparency in what was changing and going from the FY22 approved budget to the FY23 budget before you, why that was changing, and then also to be able to highlight as clearly as possible how those changes were impacting city funds, so that you have an understanding of how it flows through to the budgets that you manage. So those were really our three objectives for these changes. Let me quickly orient you to the materials, and then I'll dive into to sort of a summary of where we're at. So Tyler has mentioned a couple of times some new nomenclature we're using. The first is the idea of a base budget. And so the base budget is simply if we took the services that you commissioned us for in fiscal 22, and we applied to that all of the things we've learned over the course of the year in terms of where to cut cost and incorporate savings, like where would we start for 23? And so this is applying a several month-long process where we sat down with every division and went through their budgets line by line to identify where we could cut costs or identify savings. And what you'll see as we get into the materials is it starts us out in constructing the 23 budget at a level $3.2 million below the approved 22 budget. So that's our base, our starting place. And then we're adding into that two categories of things that we think are largely non-discretionary, and those are inflation, market, and ridership, and continuing commitments. So an example of the inflation and market ridership categories would be the price of gas. It is going up, and we're going to pay what the market demands. So the real question out there is whether we'll buy gas or not, but what we think the average price will be over the upcoming fiscal year. Another example would be paratransit ridership. It's coming back, and we have to make some assumptions about what level of paratransit and ride choice returns do we want to incorporate into the budget. And so these are discretionary in the sense that we think it's important to work with you and your staff on what should those assumptions be, but at the end of the day, we're going to pay for what arrives. And so there isn't really budget policy making being there. There's a lot of estimating that's going on. The next category are continuing commitments, and those are things like, for example, the startup associated with implementing the new fare collection system. The board has approved the implementation of that system, and there's equipment and whatnot that has to be bought this year to be ready for that. Another example would be our East Valley bus contracts. So those contracts include an inflator in the contract between years that increases the price per revenue mile by 2.2% per year. It's part of the contract. We simply have to honor that contract. And so those are increases that have been previously approved by the board that have cost impacts on this year. So our last category are Valley Metro recommendations, and that's where we wanted to help the board focus on its making fiscal policy for Valley Metro. And so these are things that are discretionary that we are requesting be added to the 23 budget that the board can decide to add or decide not to add. In some cases, you'll see in a minute, they are related to inflation and other factors, but they're cases where the board's making fiscal policy. We wanted to really call those out and make them clear and distinct from the cases where what you're really doing is estimating more than making policy decisions. Okay, so with that nomenclature in mind, I'm going to just quickly acquaint you with the format. We'll dive into the content of this format in another slide or two. So the way that you read this format is, let's first go horizontally. There are three tiers. The very top tier captures all funds, so all funding sources, and it's breaking it down, you see on the left, between support services, which Tyler mentioned include all of our sort of administrative and support costs, but also things like funding for the mobility center, funding for the customer service call center, and then transit services, which are entirely providing transit to your communities, right? The next tier down is there are those same two categories, but shows just the portion that's city funded. And then the very bottom tier are PTF and all other funds, PTF, federal, fares, et cetera. And so by making this distinction, we wanted both to be able to provide an overall picture of what was changing, but also very clearly call out how those changes were impacting city budgets, because we know that's of great importance. So reading the columns from left to right, you see we start with the fiscal 22 approved budget. We then go to the 23 base, and you see the change column there noting that the portion of that $3.2 million reduction that attributes to RPTA. We then have columns for inflation and ridership, the continuing commitments, and then finally, 2 columns over from the right, the Valley Metro recommendations that we're seeking. And so in a minute, I'll dive into both what these numbers are telling us overall and then what some of the particular issues are, but I wanted to make sure you could kind of read the table. Okay, accompanying this table in the board's packet are 2 new documents. The first is we call change summaries. And so this document has sections for RPTA only, for issues that impact RPTA and VMR both, and for issues that are VMR only. And so we wanted to be able to call out which agency a particular issue impacts so that the board members could key on those that represented the boards that they sit on. Now, within each of these agency-oriented sections, we've got 3 categories. The first category, which you see in green, are those things that were inflation and ridership driven. The second category, which you see in blue, are those things that were continuing commitments. We wanted to be able to distinguish those visually in what's otherwise a fairly dense document. And then the Valley Metro recommendations, those that were truly discretionary, we have in plain black and white text. A couple other things to note when looking at this document. So every single change that gets us from that 23 base, from the 23 base to the final 23 recommendation are represented here. So this is a transparent crosswalk between the 2 years. For each issue, you have for each issue, you have either 1 or 2 numbers. If it's in the RPTA only, the amount is the impact on the RPTA budget. If it's in the VMR only section, the amount's the impact on the VMR section. This one you can see is in the joint section because you have an RPTA amount followed by a little R behind it, and a VMR amount followed by a little V behind it. And then a brief summary in the middle there of what that issue is and why that change is, in this case, is recommended. Now, the other thing to notice at the very bottom of each of these change summaries is a number on a gray background. So that's the change number. We added that for a couple of reasons. One, we wanted to make it easier for folks to sort of reference the change that they're talking about and not have to page through a document looking for a name that's not in alphabetical order or anything else. Okay, as importantly, in addition to the brief summary that you have here in the summary document, we also are providing a detailed description of each change in the detailed change sheets, and that issue number ties back to the issue number in the upper left-hand corner of this document. So for every summary change, there's a detail. The detail in the middle talks through the what and the why, and then in the table at the bottom breaks out the cost in a little more detail where that's available. Okay. So we're hoping that this makes sort of what's changing in our budget much more transparent than it was in the past and provides a much higher level of detail both to you, to your staff, and to the board members than we've done in the past, and can reduce what used to kind of turn into a little bit of a game of 20 questions, where you were looking at a table and saying, why did this number go up or why did this number go down? And now you can see everything that's going up and down and why from the get-go. Okay, with that orientation, let me dive for a moment into both RPTA and VMR and talk through what the major changes are at a high level, and then we'll begin to get into an overview of just a few of the issues today. So the first thing to notice on the RPTA overview is in the FY22 change column that I've highlighted there, we have a $2.7 million reduction. So that is the base reduction that I talked about a little bit earlier. We didn't detail all of the things we were reducing in the base because they were reductions, not additions, but just to give you a flavor of that, that's a 41% reduction in RPTA's travel budget. It's a 78% reduction in the replacement of non-revenue fleet. It's a 60% reduction in printing associated with a digital transit book. It's like a 33% reduction in the replacement of PCs and other computer equipment, right? So there's a whole grab bag of, in many cases, sort of $1,000 here, $1,000 there reductions in each of the budgets of our divisions that come to that $2.7 million reduction, initial reduction in RPTA. Now, the second thing you'll notice in the base column is down below in the city funded section. In spite of that $2.7 million reduction, city costs are still going up $6.6 million right out of the gate. And the reason for that, as Tyler pointed out a minute ago, is the exhaustion of the federal COVID dollars. So we were using COVID funding to buy down the costs of transit purchased by cities and the use of Ptf. That's now been exhausted for RPTA, and so this is moving back to sort of a normal level. In a normal year, city funds for RPTA are between 30 and 27%. In FY22, they were 23%. So you're going from 23% in 22 back up to 27% in the 23 recommendation. Okay, so the last thing I'll point out is we start out with that initial reduction, but the loss of federal COVID funds. Where we end up in the total budget out on the right is a $26.4 million total increase. So that's a chunk. Let me give you a sense quickly of where that's coming from. So moving to the next slide, this table shows all of the changes going from the 23 base to the 23 final budget, and we've categorized them in the same color-coded way between inflationary on the left in green, continuing commitments in blue in the center, and then Valley Metro recommendations on the right. And so at a high level, what's driving that $26 million change? Well, first, you'll see at the bottom of the blue column, it's $17 million in inflationary costs. And you can see the individual issues that comprise that there. Our intent wasn't to actually go into those in any depth in this meeting. However, we were hoping to spend time visiting with your staff about each of those in the upcoming RTAC meeting. We really wanted to go through both the blue and the green columns with them in quite a bit of depth to make sure that they're understanding why we believe these are non-discretionary changes, how we came to the numbers that we came to, and hopefully arrive at some consensus around those so that policymakers aren't having to waste their time talking about the price of gas and can really focus on areas where they're making budgetary policy. So the next area over, the next biggest piece is $6.7 million in continuing commitments. And you can see once again, those are things like the one-time implementation of the new fare collection system and bus contract rate changes. Okay, so that last column in black are the Valley Metro recommendations. However, it's important to recognize that the top two items in that column, operations contingency and Valley Metro labor market, are in fact inflationary issues. The labor market I'll talk about in just a second because I want to highlight that in a little bit more detail. The operations contingency is essentially the same issue. It's the fact that our contractors are trying to hire people with contracts let several years ago when the wage rates weren't exploding and are being unable to do so, and we're seeing a dramatic increase in missed trips year over year. So as a quick example of that, I think in November we missed 400 bus trips in the East Valley. In February, we missed 4,000. So this is a very serious issue that we know is going to have to be addressed in this budget. And so we're sort of creating a placeholder to allow us to have that conversation with you and your staff before working with our contractors. Now, what we're not doing here, and you'll see this when you look at the detail sheet, is we're not calling out specific amounts for specific contracts because we don't want to bias the negotiations with those contractors or between those contractors and their labor unions. So we feel like for transparency's purposes with the board, we've got to acknowledge this is an issue and and give the board the capacity to either funding to address it should they choose to. But we don't want to put explicit numbers for each contract out there because then we know exactly what proposals we'll get back from those contractors.
But it does kind of signal a set aside. What happens, and I don't understand how the dynamics of your funds, what happens to the net difference between the revenues and the expenses? If you didn't put this in the expense budget, where does it go? Where does it show up?
You bet. Okay, that's a great question. Thank you, Mr. Brady. So, so the answer to that kind of depends on which agency you're talking about. And so on the RPTA side, which is what we're talking about here, much of the expenses we're talking about here could be covered with PTF because they're in fact just the purchase of transportation. Okay, and so any amount that's included in this budget as a contingency and happens to be funded with PTF, if it's not needed, it simply remains in the public transportation fund, right, and is available for use in future years. Okay, so it essentially just accrues as part of that $250 million surplus we talked about a minute ago. Now, on the RPTA, on the Valley Metro Rail side, what you'll see there is those costs end up being about 60-40 city costs versus all others, fare and federal. And so in that case, monies that are set aside there have to be set aside in your city budgets for the city portion of those costs. Now, they can either be set aside in your city budgets and we can bill you for them, or you can that's frankly how it would happen because we would incorporate it as a placeholder into our IGAs. And so then should the board decide to modify contracts to address labor issues, and that's really important because we can't touch these contracts without the board's approval. Should the board decide to do that, then those would be billed to the cities in proportion through their IGAs. And if they didn't, it simply remains in your city general fund or your city transit fund. But you're essentially setting that money aside and not using it for other purposes in the current year.
And so your fear could be, you don't want the wrath of the city saying you didn't tell us this, and you'd rather take the money from us now and put it in your budget versus inevitably know, like you're saying, there's going to be new contracts, there's going to be higher. And the question is, strategically, process-wise, is it better to go ahead and just make the assumption of what that is, either show it up here or not, and then just come back and say, okay, so he's like, we're not going to ask for it now, but I don't want to hear any murmuring or crying, in 6 months from now when I'm going to come back because I told you I'm going to have new contracts, I need more money. Is there an option? I think we all know what's coming. I probably should be more concerned, but I'm okay with what you're telling us as far as the city perspective. I'm a little more concerned about strategically as you go into negotiations, having this kind of sitting there like this.
Right.
And I'm wondering if you could do all the same and collect from us, but it falls out into some kind of reserve that then where it is, you can draw upon it. You obviously still have to come back to the board for the contracts and say, we have a contingency, but I guess the question is, where's the best place to budget a contingency? As a line item or as part of a larger contingency, right? Maybe some kind of restricted contingency that sits at the bottom without necessarily making it so obvious. I guess that's my question. I don't know the answer to this. I think something we need to keep talking about, and we're going to solve it today, but to just throw that out as maybe we got to think about other options.
No, completely agree. And I think what you're seeing here is a bit of a middle ground in the sense that, like, we could have rolled it into an overall agency contingency, but we'd still have to talk to you about it because you still have to know it was there and why we were doing it. Or we could have it in specific line items, and I think we all agree that's a bad idea. This one sort of takes a middle path of, we'll create a separate contingency for this issue, but we won't break it out because we know there's 3 or 4 different contracts that are all being impacted by these same things. We would be fine with, frankly, any of the above.
What would it actually be called? You'd just call it operations contingency?
That's what we're calling it for purposes of this budget, but honestly, we've never found ourselves in this situation before, so we're very open to different ways.
That's fine. I don't want to spend a lot more time on it. I just think I'd like to see one more option where it's maybe not as a line item, but it's just like in your, I don't know what you guys call it, some kind of, whatever the net is, of your income, whether it's a fund balance or whatever you call it. Maybe it's a restricted portion of that or something like that.
Sure.
Right. So, but we can still have those conversations.
Yeah, I think however the board and you are comfortable addressing this, we're comfortable with. Obviously, we'd have to have the expenditure authority to draw on it down the road, but how we get there,
But you're going to bring those contracts forward.
Precisely.
And then you could bring the authorization for the additional dollars too.
And we would individually for those.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you.
Thanks.
So I guess I'm glad we've had a little bit of discussion of that because this is the oddest issue in the budget and one that we're trying to strike the right balance between transparency with the board and, not tipping our hand.
Right.
Now, the larger point I guess I want to make here is if you net out those 2 issues, which are essentially inflationary issues from the discretionary items, what you're left with is basically $950,000 of discretionary requests on Valley Metro's part. On a $167 million base budget, that's half of 1%. So I never thought I'd hear myself saying this, but this is a $26.4 million ask that is remarkably conservative because you're only seeing half of 1% in discretionary increases outside of inflation and things the board has already told us to do. So a big total increase, but almost entirely, 99.5%, not driven by things that are within Valley Metro's direct control. Okay, moving on to the VMR section. Let me quickly walk you through the table in a similar fashion. So once again, in the base budget, you'll notice we're seeing here about a $500,000 total decrease. Jumping down to the city-funded portion of the base budget, you see an $8 million total decrease, and that is, once again, as Tyler mentioned before, the fact that both we have significant additional CARES monies available here, and we're expecting fare revenues to double. We were at about $2.5 million for the last year. We think they're going to be $5 million in the upcoming year, and so both of those are really accruing to city's benefits here. Once again, the overall increase at 19 million is a big number, but two things. Number one, the impact of those additional fares and CRISA monies means this year, the impact on cities' budgets is only a little less than $1 million. And as we'll see in a minute, once again, this is largely driven by inflation and other continuing commitments. Okay, so this table laid out the same way as the last. And I'll just walk through the numbers in the same fashion. So you've got $1.4 million roughly in strictly ridership and inflationary costs. You've got $7.2 million in continuing commitments. And Eric, we know we're in an ongoing conversation with your team about what the streetcar operations number should be. We'll modify that as we work through it. Right? And then lastly, the Valley Metro recommendations area. And once again, those top three items, you have the VMR side of the operations contingency we just talked about, the staff component of wage rate inflation, which I'll talk more about in just a minute, and then an insurance cost contingency. So as you all probably recall, we had like a 48% increase in our insurance rates this last year because our historic providers stopped underwriting us, and we were seeing much higher rates from other providers in the market. So the challenge this year is going to be, we're adding more rolling stock with both Tempe streetcar and the new Siemens vehicles, and we're adding more track miles. And so all of that equates to more exposure. I think we have to expect that there'll be additional increases. How much will they be? We have no idea. So one component of this recommendation, if you happen to look at the detailed sheet, is $16,000 to bring in an actuary to help us assess whether we should be self-insuring some portion of our liability. And so that may be a way for us to mitigate future cost growth, and we're working with a committee of your Valley risk managers.
Are you self-insured to any point right now?
We are not. We're 100%.
Oh yeah, go do that.
So Mike is leading that charge. We'll have that additional information in the upcoming year. And then the question is, how much do we want to set aside in anticipation of a likely increase? And it comes actually back to exactly the point that you made, Mr. Brady, is if we don't include anything, then we run the risk of hitting cities up mid-year. Then what is the right amount to include? Yep. Okay, so once again, the same math applies here. When you net out those top three, the actual amount of discretionary funding that Valley Metro is seeking here is about $2.9 million. That's actually a 3.5% increase on a total $80 million Valley Metro rail-based budget. So bigger than the 0.5% we saw in RPTA. But it's really important to recognize that on the VMR side, we're going from a young system where everything was under warranty and was brand new to a system where, like your car at 80,000 miles versus 20,000 miles, you're simply going to spend more on maintenance. And so that is going to be the case in this budget. It's going to be the case in every budget, from here on out for the rail side, because the physical reality is stuff is wearing out, and it just costs us more to keep it in a state of good repair. And so in light of that, we think this 3.5% increase is also remarkably conservative. Okay.
So do you have an asset management program cycle, and this is then funding that, or is this the beginning of the creation of that?
I'm so glad you asked. So we do have, it's called the Transit Asset Management Program, and it's a program not just within Valley Metro, but it's required by federal law.
We just had that consultant's report, right?
Exactly, and it's going to be coming to the full board in April. So you guys saw it.
So it hasn't made it all the way through. Okay.
We had to defer it for the board, because of the other issues.
I don't know, Jessica kind of got in the way, I think.
Right. Human capital is our most
Human capital.
So the board hasn't seen that yet. You guys have.
Okay.
So they'll be seeing that the next time we have a budget discussion with them. But Julie, thank you for asking, because there actually are a couple of asset management issues in this budget as well. You'll see one of the discretionary items for VMR and RPTA is adding a transit asset administrator to help us sort of keep up with entry of all those assets into the asset management system where we're using to track their life cycle costs so that we can optimize them, right? That we're making sure that we're replacing them at the right point in their life cycle and keeping them as long as possible. Okay, so with that, I will turn it back over to Tyler for a quick, I'm sorry. I forgot, okay, I mentioned a couple times our Valley Metro staffing issues, and I just want to highlight these for you. So I think those numbers speak for themselves. We were not in a great place in November. We're in a terrible place in February with 44% of our LRV inspector positions vacant, 40% of our electromechanicals vacant, 40% of our system communication technicians vacant. We have been hit hard by the current labor market. You can make a lot more money working in other fields that don't require you to do 24/7 shift coverage. And work in a swamp cool but not air conditioned operations and maintenance center all summer. So we're really struggling here. There's some things that we're doing of our own accord this year to try to mitigate that. However, we need the board's continued support both this year and next. So the things that we're doing this year is we're implementing a retention bonus for our operations staff, $2,500. We're also implementing a hiring bonus to try to get us to compete a little bit more effectively in this market. We're simply not having folks show up at the front door even to interview at the point we're at now. Down at the bottom, you'll see we're adjusting starting wages for key roles. So we're going in, we've already gone in, made those adjustments to try to be more competitive with what we're seeing in the market for like skill sets. And then two things here. The one that's noted, we've also increased our level of shift differential to try to compensate people better for working nights and weekends. And then lastly, we've also implemented a 4-10 schedule to try to help folks have a little bit better work-life balance with their families in this kind of shift work environment. We're doing that within our existing budget because frankly, we're awash in vacancy savings. And so we can do that without any additional budgetary authorization. There is another change that we really need the board's support in making this year. And that's the bottom of the, at the bottom of that section. We'd like to implement a 5% COLA this year. Not retroactive, but go forward as soon as the board will give us its consent to address all staff, because the changes we're talking about here only apply to folks that are working in the OMC or a customer relations center, but we're bleeding good folks across the agency. This is pretty consistent with what we found in a survey of other Valley cities of, Avondale, Mesa, several others have stepped in and done larger COLAs this year. We really think that's necessary and not something that can wait until the new fiscal year. We noticed there that we're asking for the board's consent because this too we can do within the existing budget. We're not doing it of our own accord this year because of course you have to annualize it in next year's budget, and we want to make sure the board's on board before we go spending their money. So lastly, we would seek to simply do the same 3% merit that we've done traditionally in the upcoming year until we see what's happening with labor rates in the upcoming year. We simply can't know whether this level of inflation will continue or not. So we hope that we'll be able to get the board support for that in April.
Mr. Chair, I've got a question.
Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So just one question on the COLA and the timing. I understand the rationale and all the information you've given us is really helpful. Given that that's across the board, I do have a question about the timing. I know that there's also in your request a request for a classification and compensation study that would occur next year. And just wondering why not wait until you get the results of that class and comp study to do this across the board? Maybe it makes sense to look at specific areas, particularly those key vacancies you had on the previous slide where you got the super high vacancy rates and target those. That's just wondering how you guys thought about that.
That's a great question, Mario. Thanks for asking. Yeah, so the challenge with the class and comp study is the last class and comp study that Valley Metro did was in 2006, which, if you're counting, was the year before the original iPhone was released. So our class and comp study is badly out of date. And so it's going to take, realistically, lots of cities are doing market studies right now where they're just going out and quickly benching their positions against the market, but that assumes that your positions are classified in a way that actually makes sense in the market. And we know there are several of ours that don't, and we've actually been addressing those on a piecemeal basis. So the first step of this class and comp study will be going in and reviewing how we have all those positions classified so that we're comparing the right things to the right things, writing new job descriptions for those, and then doing a market study as the last phase of that. And so the challenge, Mario, is this class and comp study is going to take us 9 months, realistically. And so if we wait 9 months to do any form of COLA in an environment where inflation in Maricopa County last year was 10%, we're simply going to bleed white. There isn't time for that. We also know, frankly, in looking back at our adjustments in recent years, that we're lagging the market. So, 2 years ago, we did a 1.5% increase as a merit. Last year, we only did 3%. And so when we look at what cities have been doing for their staffs and what MAG has recently done for its staff, we already know we're pretty significantly behind a lot of the entities that we sort of bench ourselves to in the region. So we think this is a good first step to essentially stop the bleeding, and then we'll come back in a much more targeted approach a year from now once we've got the results of that class and comp study.
Well, and I'll just say this. Your employees are your most important asset. And they're making, if you keep paying them the same salary you did a year ago, you're paying them less.
Yep.
Effectively. And if they don't see some kind of gesture, strong gesture right now, one, the morale is going to be very low, and two, they're just going to go somewhere else. That's why, to me, it wasn't even, there wasn't any question when we took it to our council, to the 5%. They all knew that, it was easy to show that we were not keeping up with our commitment, and we told people, here's what your salary is a year ago. And in January, it was less. There was no doubt about effectively what they could purchase with that. So I recommend you do this as fast as you can. I don't think every city in this valley is doing better than it's ever done before as far as revenue collections. That won't last forever, but labor is tight, and you don't want to lose the best of your best. So I think you should have done it yesterday, but that's my opinion. So good luck.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I'll hand it back to Tyler to do a quick overview of our capital budget.
Thank you, Jim. So starting with RPTA, capital budget items include fleet replacements for Valley Metro as well as your cities, local PTF match funded with PTF, regional facilities, regional projects. You've heard a lot about the fare collection system modernization. That's included in here, which I'll talk about later. State of good repair, of course, based on our transit asset management plan and debt service. How does that funding look? Almost entirely funded by public transportation and federal funds. Just a little amount of other funding. The sources and uses for that, the most significant item here, you can see that there's an increase of $15.5 million for 23. That is directly related to the fare box replacement that was recently awarded. That will line up exactly with our fare collection system launch 2, phase 2, which is rolling out our smart cards to the general public, as well as the new hardware at all light rail and streetcar alignments. And that's an 80-20 match, so you can see the federal is also going up for that, and PTF adjusting accordingly. Valley Metro Rail side of things, our capital budget includes project studies at your city's request, really the preliminary activities for those, and of course the construction related to those extensions, system-wide improvements, so enhancements of the existing alignment, as well as state of good repair, maintaining those assets in a safe manner and efficient, reliable manner. A quick look at the capital projects on the Valley Metro Rail side. In FY23, we'll have 2 active construction projects, South Central and Northwest Phase 2, as well as some preliminary work on capital extension and I-10 West. So funding for that, primarily federal funds. Our capital program is very heavily reliant on federal funding. PTF is really just a local match provided to that, as well as member city contributions as part of that. Sources and uses for 23, we have $395 million programmed. The biggest changes for that are really the winding down of a few projects as we near the revenue service start date. Tempe streetcar, you can see that's significantly down $16 million. Looking forward to opening that very soon. South Central Downtown Hub, the majority of that work is planned for 22, and so you can see kind of we're on the downward slope of that project. Same with Northwest Extension. So next steps.
So I'll jump back in on this one here. I think you see the list of meetings we'll have coming up to continue to discuss these issues. A couple things just quickly to highlight. So tomorrow in the meeting with AFS, Councilmember Stipp has asked us to really focus on the Valley Metro recommendations. And so we're going to do, there's 26 of those in total, and we're going to deep dive into 24 of them in that meeting to try to really give them an understanding of what's being requested there and why, so they can make informed decisions. The next opportunity is RTAG on the 19th, and our thought is to really spend time with your staff and RTAG going through the inflationary issues and the continuing commitments. We'd really like to make sure that folks understand those. Hopefully what we do is arrive at some consensus around both the level of discretionary decision-making in each of those and some consensus on how we're getting to the numbers involved, so that the board is hearing both from us and from your staff that we've got a good handle on those, and they can really focus on the places where the meaningful changes are happening. Again, that's in the recommendations. And then we'll once again be coming back for the full board cycle in May for additional discussion. Should the board choose to take action in May, that would be wonderful. If they don't, then obviously we're setting aside the June cycle as well. So that is a faster version of what your people heard. For them. This is Budget by Filibuster. We hope it was useful.
Thank you. Are there any questions? This is just for information. Well, let me just say this. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Eric, go ahead.
just one quick comment. And I know we'll have a lot of, well, we have a couple more months or weeks to go through the budget. Appreciate the more transparent information. I think it's really helpful. Our team thinks it's really helpful, and want to thank you for that. We want to point out, and I know you've heard this a lot from Tempe over the years, and I think the AFS discussion will include this on Thursday, tomorrow.
Yes.
But all the information you're providing about all the really fluid conditions that we're in economically right now are really important to consider. But overall, if we're seeing this information correctly, what we're seeing is that the expenditures that we're showing and the increase in those contract costs and the ask to the cities coming forward at this point, and I know it's fluid, is still exceeding even that strong economic growth that we're seeing in the cities. So I just want to make that point that the growth in the ask for the contract costs is exceeding what we're seeing even in that robust economic growth in our local sales tax. It's really more of a comment, and just wanted to put that out there for setting the tone for our upcoming budget discussions, but wanted to note that.
Appreciate that. And let me just say, I've heard the same thing Eric has heard. Compliments to you all for the new format and the transparency. I think it's been well received. And I think people now understand the programmatic side as opposed to trying to work through the line items and then get to the programmatic side. So I think, as I've kind of gone through some of these pages, and I'm only imagining, there's been a lot of work on this. And sometimes when you work in the budget office, it's like, when do we celebrate? When we're done, we take it to the board, or we wait till the board, chews it up and spits it out, and then we do it. And by then it's so anticlimactic, you're just glad it's over with. So maybe we should take this moment and say thank you and appreciate all the hard work. Because just to get to this point, we don't see, but we know, because we do these, right? We see, the labor camps that are taking place behind here to get all this done. There's a lot of work, right? Tying all these numbers together and then putting together the narratives, right, that can be met. So thank you for that. Appreciate that. So, the themes here are like costs are rising, labor, inflation are rising, and hey, all that free money you got from the feds, we're coming off of that. So be ready for these increased costs. I think there is part of this issue of putting that contingency in too early does create this kind of reaction of, oh, this is more than whatever. So I think the timing of when you have to deal with those costs is really important, because you're estimating, and that's not a bad thing to do, but where you kind of disclose that and how you account for that early on could affect the conversation you have with elected officials. So you may just want to think about that.
Thank you.
Anyway, any other comments? Okay, anybody online?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, this is
yeah,
Mario.
Sorry, yes. Go ahead.
Just one more thing on that point you just made in terms of negotiating with our contractors. And I mentioned this at a recent meeting as well, but we do know that, as Jim mentioned, the vacancy savings in Valley Metro that are available to pay for some of the salary increases, contractors should be seeing some of those same vacancy savings that they've experienced over the last several months. And so that's something that we don't want to let them forget as we enter those negotiations, that they should have some residual dollars from those vacancy savings as well.
Go ahead.
Quickly, thank you for raising that point, Mario. Certainly, where contractors are having vacancies in administrative positions, I mean, our perspective is that's your problem to solve because you are accruing vacancy on those. I think the areas that we're really focused on from a service provisions perspective are operators, for example, security staff, and just so the committee's aware, those contracts are all funded on a cost per service provided basis. So for example, the East Valley bus contracts are entirely cost per revenue mile. That cost per revenue mile includes both the contractor's fixed cost, like the facility and all their overhead and their profit, and the variable costs of the drivers. And so when they don't drive a revenue mile, they don't get paid, and then they don't recoup their fixed costs and their profit. So one of the documents that we've shared with AFS previously is a list of all the things that our contractors are doing on their own dime to try to fill these positions. And they're doing hiring bonuses and they're doing wage increases because they need to get the positions filled to provide the service to get paid. So I think we feel like thus far we've had a pretty good partnership with them because they have a giant incentive to provide the service because they're frankly losing money on this vacancy at this time, not making it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, understood. I was thinking of the security contract, for example, where you talked about in a previous meeting. There's an extensive number of vacancies there. Are we paying any less on the security contract because of the vacancies that they have?
Yeah, Mario, thank you. Yes. Yeah, so that contract too is actually entirely funded on a per labor hour basis. And so when they don't fill a shift, we don't pay for it.
Okay. All right.
Do you realize the savings in your budget?
We do. Yep.
Okay. Good. But those are good points. We want to make sure if there's any savings in there we can apply. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
There's no more questions for item 4. We'll go to item 5. Again, this is items presented for information only. Are there any questions on item number 5? Go to item 6. A report on current events and suggested future items. Are there any members who have wish to have a report or talk about a current event for future meetings? No? All right. Last item, next meeting. The next meeting of the TMC RMC is scheduled for Wednesday, May 4th, 2022 at 11 a.m. So that concludes our joint meeting. Now we'll transition to the Transit Management Committee. All right. Convene the meeting and welcome members to the April meeting. The public will be provided with an opportunity at this time to address the committees on non-agenda items and all action agenda items. Up to 3 minutes will be provided per speaker unless the chair allows more at his or her discretion. A total of 15 minutes for all speakers will be provided. He's right in place, right on cue. I like that. Go ahead, 3 minutes.
Don't want to waste anybody's time, but having to correct your new CEO. We can't put bikes on the buses unless you've changed a policy. And I'm the one that got the bike racks on the buses system-wide. So when you said you can bring your bike on the bus, that's not true. Even though if we were able to use the handicapped area, it would be a nice thing.
You can attach it to the bus.
Right.
On, outside, it's still on.
Okay, so let's get started because it didn't even move. With your proposed route changes and such, I look at like Route 30 and 83rd Avenue. You're supposed to have 83rd Avenue going all the way to the Arrowhead Mall. 99th is supposed to have a route in that, but those weren't done because of whatever changed back in the day. I'd like you to look at those 2 routes, and next year and your October changes for March, have those buses go by the facilities, as in on Route 30, it could go by the Angel Stadium, and the 83rd Avenue could go by the Peoria one, so that during spring training, one of the options people could use was use the bus. I've got documents that you had sitting over there, and my favorite is the one on Waymo, which I'll get to in a moment. But in here it says program capital expenditures, and it has for rail 379,551,740. So I look at that and add up what it has then for bus, because it's supposed to be 60/40 expenditures that we're taking care of both. So I'll just roll up that 379 and we'll make it 400 million. Where's the 600 million for the bus? Well, you know how much you're spending? 66 million, 1/10. So explain to me how it is that you are being proactive for the transit side and where those monies aren't. I'd also like to point out your document from 2018 sitting over there on the thing, and it's got your interactions with Waymo. And it says in here, Valley Metro bus and light rail stops, that it would be able to do that. Well, you all know that Waymo, when they did their example, never went to the rail. And then the other paragraph, Valley Metro Waymo partnership is a step in that direction. If everything goes as planned, it's step off the platform and Waymo car and go to your next step terrain. So it's saying in here, hey, rail was going to be a part of their test. It wasn't. As I said, with the amount of money that you've spent on rail, where is the equal going to the bus? And if you will look in your minutes, I said that we need to be extending out into the Tonopah, Anthem, Queen Creek, and those were in the system a long time ago, but you're not even doing that. And when you talk about outreach, where is the outreach for the public to be inputting, saying, we need a bus here, we need more buses here? It's not in the way you put it together.
All right, we'll now move to the consent agenda. The consent agenda is presented for action. There's two items. Are there any questions or items that need to be pulled for separate discussion? I don't see any questions online. Okay, if not, I'm requesting a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Julie made a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Eric. Very good. We have a motion and a second. Pat, will you provide a roll call vote, please?
City of Avondale, Shirley Pinella. City of Buckeye, Dan Cotterman. City of Chandler, Brian Peters.
Yes.
City of El Mirage, Autumn Grooms. Town of Fountain Hills, Dave Trimble.
Aye.
Town of Gilbert, Rob Bohr.
Aye.
City of Glendale, Kevin Phelps. He did leave a note in the chat that he had to leave the meeting.
Okay, thanks.
Longer present. City of Goodyear, Julie Cairns.
Aye.
Maricopa County, Jacqueline Edwards. City of Mesa, Chris Brady.
Yes.
City of Peoria, Eric Strunk.
Yes.
City of Phoenix, Mario Paniagua.
Yes.
Town of Queen Creek, Bruce Gardner.
Yes.
City of Scottsdale, Mark Melanchenko.
Yes.
City of Surprise, Mike Gent.
Yes.
And City of Tempe, Eric Iverson.
Yes.
Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you, Pat. The next item is item number 3, proposed October 2022 service changes. Proposed October 22 service changes are presented for information. Are there any questions from the committee members on this item? Very good. If not, we'll move to item 4. Again, ask, are there members that have any reports or current events for future agenda items? If not, item 5, we'll go to item 5. The next meeting is Wednesday, May 4th, 2022 at 11 a.m. Thank you for members of the Transit Committee meeting. We will now move to Valley Metro Rail. Thank you for members of Transit. Page here. We'll now convene the meeting of the Rail Management Committee meeting for April. The public will be provided with an opportunity at this time to address the committee on non-agenda items and all action items. Up to 3 minutes will be provided per speaker unless the chair allows more at his or her discretion. A total of 15 minutes for all speakers will be provided. Hello, Blue, how are you doing?
Hanging out waiting.
Good, I appreciate it. Thank you.
As I have tried to state before, that when it comes to the bus, I want every dime I can getting more buses than that out there. So when I see your system fact sheet and it's showing that this year that 379 million 500 or 375 million 555,740 is for the rail, and at the same time 66 million goes for the bus. That's not an equitable distribution, and I don't see you being as aggressive as you should on making those things happen. But the most important part of it is I know this is your single meeting, but you're supposed to be multimodal. With this new extension, having 5 bus routes, not having connection, how are you being multimodal? How are you effectively making all of the system function and work? You're not. And I understand that rail is the more money and the more intensity, but the bus is what's the backbone of the whole entire system, because where you put the rail, it stays. Rubber tire, you can move it and adapt the system. But I don't see that that's a part of what you're doing. I also note that supposedly operating cost for the rail projects is the different cities. Well, in your document a moment ago, I looked and it said streetcar, rail, operating cost. Now, at first you guys said it was a bus, and that's how you were going to fund it through the bus monies. And then some other parts came about, and now it's listed under rail. So if it's a rail, why are you using our funds to pay for operating, since the city of Tempe is supposed to handle any of the rail operations that are within their community? I note that there isn't any real expansion in your service changes. It should have been doing that all along. I love that you guys are adding so much of the rail, but when the expenditures are there, why aren't you paying for the bus? And I'll give you 10 seconds back.
All right, ready for the consent agenda. There are 5 items on consent. Are there any committee members that need to have one of these items pulled for separate consideration? If not, Mario and Eric, these look a lot like yours. So I'm open for a motion and a second.
I move approval of the consent agenda.
We have a motion. Do we have a second, Eric?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Thank you very much. Pat, we don't. Oh, there's 4 of us. So who's? Is he on? Ryan, how do you feel about this?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's on good. I'm good. Okay, motion and second, all approved. Okay, sorry. The hybrid format's a little different. Okay, so now we're going to item 3. Do we have any committee members that have reports on current events or would ask or seeking a agenda item for a future meeting? If not, the next meeting is Wednesday, May 4th, 2022 at 11 a.m. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Take care.